Do you remember last week we talked about the coconut and how the outer world is the husk, and then there's the inner world, the meat in there, and then in that there was something more inner, and that was the water, that formlessness within the center of the coconut? Well, today I read a scripture from the Complete Works from Vivekananda, and he says the following: "Delusion creates delusion." Now, what is delusion? Delusion is seeing something not as it is. So this world being one without a second, being seen in its multiplicity, that's delusion. And how does that happen? Well, the mind, the contents of mind, I think, I'm going to posit for a moment, that the contents of mind are delusional. That we come up with a fact, and then we have another perception, goes into the mind, and we link its relationship with what is already in the mind. And there's lots of room for error with that. You see that these days in all of this crazy news and all of these conspiracy theories, that if you get one thing wrong, or if you have an odd idea about something, if you build on top of that wrong idea, you get a huge structure of thought that's just flat out inaccurate. That's delusional. So delusion creates delusion. If you don't get your fundamental thinking proper, and that's where the scripture and your guru come into play, then things that you build in your mind are not necessarily accurate, which is why we get so many perspectives on a simple thing like the vaccine for taking care of disease. And holding that delusion, one of the things you do is once you've got a good delusion going, you kind of build on that, support it with things that support the ideas or the conclusions of that delusion. So we're in quite a predicament here, because our personality and our idea of who and what we are is delusional. We don't build on the idea of one without a second. We don't build on the idea of immortality and oneness of all things. We tend to create an individual and maintain that individual, and we begin to love that individual, and the more things that we can find that build up the individuality of that individual become things that we trust and think and stand on for our lives. And he says this delusion creates itself and eventually destroys itself. It comes crashing down, this make-believe tower. And such is Maya. So this is what we're going to call Maya, this structure of ideas that we create on a false idea, initial false ideas of what we are, and build a whole world of multiplicity around it. All knowledge, being based on Maya, is a vicious circle, and in time that very knowledge destroys itself. Let go the rope of Maya. Now this is an interesting thing. Of course, we hear that all the time. Let go of the rope. In that great poem by Vivekananda, it says, "Yours is the hand that holds the rope that binds you down, sannyasin bold. Say Om Tat Sat Om, let go thy hold," So it's this notion that we're holding on to something. And what we're holding on to is the thoughts of mind. Mind doesn't create unique thoughts without an attachment of the self, of the idea of me and mine, the idea of I. So we identify with the contents of the mind, and we like the contents of the mind. And so in doing so, it produces a sense of power in the mind. We have conversations with the mind. We have conversations with ourself, what we call ourself, our lower self, trying to convince ourselves not to do wrong things or to do right things or to get out of bed on time and whatnot. He says, let go the rope of Maya. Delusion cannot touch the Atman. Now remember, yesterday we were talking about that idea, the day before, that this Maya, this seeming world of multiplicity, never actually touches the self. You are always the observer of mind and the observer and perceiver of body and senses, but they have no direct access to you. You live in a world of one behind all of it, and it's only these multiple portals of view, meaning different bodies and different minds and different sets of eyes, that oneness is looking through. And that identity with each body, that delusion that happens, that attachment to the body and mind, a particular body and mind, creates this sense of individual. And this is the rope that binds us down. That's how we get bound into karma. We become through identity with body-mind, responsible for body-mind, and we hold on to all of the stress that comes from that exercise. So he says delusion cannot touch the Atman. So none of this wrong thinking actually is you or can actually touch you at all. But it's your belief that it is you and your idea and your thinking and your knowledge prevents you from being able to let go and be unaffected by it. He says, when we lay hold of the rope, when we lay hold of this machination of mind, identify ourselves with it, with Maya, it has power over us. And that's why we can't seem to do the things that we want to do, because those ideas that say, hey, you know what, have that 5th piece of cake, we think that's my idea. I must want 5 pieces of cake. But in fact, you are not the body and you are not the mind, and that desire is not arising from you. You know, it's in the mind, but you're going to place an I on it, which gives a great deal of power to it. And you believe that it's yourself, the capital S self, that you're denying, but in fact it's not. It's just the idea that you're denying. He says, let go of it. Be a witness only. Then you can admire the picture of the universe undisturbed. So you can, by non-attachment, by understanding that you're separate from all of this, if you can maintain that neutrality of the observer, the watcher, and not identify yourself with any of the content of the mind, there's great peace in that. There's great strength in that. That is how we find immortality. That's how we find our true nature. That state of being established in that is realization. And so, of course, the mind always brings up the idea because we want to protect this sense of ego. We like it. We like ourselves. We like our personalities in general. If we don't like it, we enjoy not liking it, which is an interesting little piece of psychology there. But our attachment always serves some delusional reality that we believe in, that we like, and that we want to preserve, always. And we have this idea that if we don't attach and if we don't see ourselves as the action or as the mover in this world, the doer in this world, then nothing will happen. That will just crank down to a stillness and become this crazy inert thing. But that's not what happens, because we're actually a manifestation. That would happen if there was nothing behind the mind. If there was no Atman, if there was no I, if there was no universal self behind the mind, then you're right. We would just crank down and become an inert piece of wood and nothing would happen. But you see, there is something behind the mind, and that nature of that something is love, intelligence, and being, and it's manifesting, which is an activity, a doer. So we are the verb of God. God is the noun, the unchanging, ever-present, eternal self, and we're the verb of that. We're the expression of that, the manifestation of that. So infinite love has infinite variety in its expressions, and your body-mind will express those things. It will continue to do what needs to be done. The body will tell the mind, I'm hungry. The mind knows how to get food, and food will be gotten. And these things will just keep turning on this wheel of samsara. They are not you. They have nothing to do with you. You are ever free. So do that work. Find that separation inside between yourself and the mind and body. And in that lies great freedom, great peace, and ultimate power.